Anjali, you can get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Vinay. Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining the first of many lined up investor showcases hosted by TIE Bangalore. And today, I'm very glad to have with me Arun Talanki, who's the founder of Waveform, and Bhargavi, who's the founder of Java Capital. We have a very informal light session today, so the plan is to do a bit of introduction so you get to know each one of us better, what's currently exciting us about the early stage ecosystem in India. We then move on to a quick fireside chat. Both Arun and Java, they run one of India's foremost angel syndicates. So we thought it'll be useful to have a quick session to help founders understand what really is the difference between seeking out an angel investor versus a syndicate investor, a little bit more on the value add construct, and just the pros and cons about how do you find an angel. And as the title says, are they really angels or are they devils? And I guess I get to play the devil's role today and get to quiz them on it. And then we'll dive straight into an AMA session. So would encourage all of you to start putting in your questions into the chat box. And 20 minutes in, or rather 40 minutes in, we'd love to take as many questions as possible from the audience on any topics. And feel free to ask direct questions to myself, Arun, Bhargavi as well, on what's currently exciting us, yays, nays, and anything you'd like to learn from us as early stage investors. With that, I will first push it over to Bhargavi. Bhargavi, welcome. Thank you so much for giving us your time in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. You're in Bangalore, so I'm sure you're enjoying the surprise summer showers, which is like much needed for all of us here, considering the inevitable summer, as they say. But Bhargavi, welcome once again. Would be great to learn a little bit more about Java, about yourself, and what's currently keeping folks at Java busy.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Anjali and Thai folks, for this opportunity. And I know many people in India are celebrating their regional New Year's yesterday and today. So happy New Year to whoever is celebrating. Let me just get started. Java Capital is going to turn 1 year very soon. And I'm one of the founding partners of Java Capital. My other two partners are Vinod Shankar and Karthik. Both of them come from VC background, and they have spent time with one of the top VCs in the country. And how our first year has been is, I think we have completed around 12 transactions, and we are in the middle of 3 more. I think many of them are yet to be announced. So we are looking forward for their announcements soon. I myself, I have been an angel investor since the last 5 years. And I used to work with corporates about a decade back. And I set up a consulting firm and advised a lot of startups in the likes of Mama Earth, Boat, Yoga Bars, mainly in investor relations, post fundraise. What do you do? How do you manage finances? That's my personal passion and personal experience. Java Capital looks at early stage, seed, pre-seed stage investments, and we are mostly sector agnostic. We have invested to date in gig economy, SaaS companies, education tech companies, and couple of frontier tech or new age tech outlier bets. I think we will discuss about a couple of them as well today. Reach out to us at hello@javacapital.co, and we read every email that we receive, and we try to respond to them with a turnaround time of 20 to 25 days at the max. We want to better it, and we are working on it. I think that's a very brief introduction. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Bhargavi. And we'll definitely pick your brains more on some of those exciting portfolio bets. And congrats on turning a year old. And would come back to you shortly. Arun, over to you, and would just love to hear what you've been up to at Waveform, and would be, I'm sure, very interesting for the audience to know about your Monster to Yahoo to Waveform journey. So please do touch upon that as well.
Thanks, Anjali. Thanks for the opportunity. Let me start with a brief introduction. I'm Arun Tadanki. I'm the lead investor at Waveform Ventures. I'm the solo GP, so I don't really have any partners. So I do all the work, whether it is sending emails or filling Excel sheets or meeting startups. It's all done by me, single person team. My background, I'm an alumnus of IIT Madras, 1990 batch. I'm Ahmedabad, 1992. I started my career with Nestle in the FMCG space, and I worked there for 8 years. And when I left, I was heading the Maggi range of products. Then back in year 2000, I took a big leap in my career. I joined a local tech startup called Jobs Ahead. I worked there for 2 years. Then I went to Monster.com, and where I led the APAC and Middle East regions. I also led Yahoo Southeast Asia and India regions for a few years before I started wearing a different hat in the startup ecosystem. So for the last few years, I've been investing in startups, advising, mentoring, doing all kinds of things, right? I mean, I guess I was trying to figure out my own reason to exist in this powerful ecosystem. And, last year, I basically started an angel syndicate because I realized that when I was investing in startups, a bunch of my friends were anyway tagging along and co-investing with me. So the recent changes in the regulations helped someone like me start very quickly with a syndicate in a more structured and a more professional way. And so I started the syndicate just as the whole world went into a lockdown. I think the timing was somewhat, nervous in the initial stages, but I think it turned out to be a brilliant year actually from a tech investing perspective. So in the last 12 months, we've done 7 new investments and 2 follow-on investments. The average age of each of these investments is like kind of less than 6 months. So it's been a pretty good going. Like Bhargavi said, I mean, we are fairly agnostic from a sector perspective. I guess as an early stage investor, you can't be too focused because markets change, markets evolve. You've got to drift with it. And so we are sector agnostic, but we have some likes. We have some spaces that we avoid for the moment. But tech companies, tech-enabled businesses, very clearly India-centric, either Indian startups focusing on Indian markets or Indian startups building products for the globe. I mean, either ways, it's okay. And we have done investments, pre-product, pre-launch, all the way to co-investing in Series A deals.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Arun. And what really excites me about having both Arun and Bhargavi here is that while all 3 of us have our separate VC funds, we've all come together as partners, to launch a very unique program called Fast Forward. And ironically, all 3 of these programs, whether it's Waveform, Java, and Fast Forward, which is WaterBridge's dedicated seed fund, are all 1 year old, I would say, and maybe lockdown inspired as well. So Fast Forward really is a program we launched the peak of the national lockdown last year when funding had nearly come to a halt. And we said that we really need to get accelerated seed funding into the hands of the most deserving founders as quickly as possible. And the reason we have partners like Java, is what Bhargavi was mentioning, is that we all believe that founder time, we all have to make this process of fundraising very efficient for founders and founder time. And often always got feedback from the founding community that whether you're trying to raise 200K or 2 million, just the long drawn, excruciatingly unsettling, indecisive fundraising process. And the inboxes of VCs seem to be like black holes where you send a pitch deck and you never hear back. And I guess that's when Arun, Bhargavi, myself, all of us literally got together and said, how can we make this early stage seed funding program less painful for founders? And is there a way that many ecosystem partners can come together and design a founder first seed program where every application is guaranteed a response within like 5 days? We definitely set up a first call and make you a term sheet offer within 15. And if we like you and we're super excited about investing, then the goal and the ambition is money in the bank in 30 days. So that said, I would encourage all of you to head to the Fast Forward website. And it's not just the 3 of us you're seeing on your screens today, but we have 10 other VC partners. And together we hope that founders can raise up to $1 million in seed funding, faster, earlier, and really just cut the chase, cut through the noise. We run this as a fully remote online application process. So just a single application, and all of us do the grunt work at the back. I like what Arun said, and I always introduce myself as a full stack VC. I think we're also a small team where we do everything from reading the application to sharing it with our investing partners, so that, as I said, the first promise is that we keep this efficient for founders. So a single online application, it's very detailed. It'll almost remind you of your college days where you're applying into college. It's like 41 questions, mostly multiple choice, some long form, but it helps us understand the company, the founder better, and more importantly, prepares us as we invite you for the first pitch. And we'll ensure that we put your application in front of 15 of us. And as I said, the promise is fast funding and help you raise and build larger rounds earlier. Having said that, we'll just quickly, pick up on some of the, introductory lines that both of you made. And Bhargavi, I'll start with you. You spoke about, taking outlier bets, and even, most of the founders always say that, VCs have a, set of sectors, and it's mostly FOMO-led, investing. And, if it's edtech today, it was ecom yesterday. But you've taken a bet in the ePlane company, which, as you rightly said, was an outlier. So it would be great to first just tell us about the ePlane company, and whether it's flying taxis or unmanned aircrafts or drones that are going to be delivering us parcels soon, and just a little more broadly on do you have a sector thesis? You mentioned you're sector agnostic, but what are the sectors that are exciting you today, and where do you see most of the deals happening?
Sure. So coming to ePlane company, ePlane company is a flying taxi. And I think being in Bangalore, the problem was very clear. The founders needn't explain us the problem much. They just told a line that you can go from wherever you are in Bangalore to the airport at probably 1.3 times the cost of a Uber. And we were, the problem and the solution was very clear from with that just one line. I think in terms of coming to how we took the outlier bet, I just wanted to first talk about Java per se, and then bring the aspect of a syndicate, because operating as a VC and operating as a syndicate is little different when you actually take bets. For us, we have a thesis in terms of where the future is moving, where we want to take a couple of outlier bets, contrarian bets, so to say, as well. This sat exactly in the bucket. It was a great team, and it was actually a co-investment which we did with another VC fund, Speciale, who are specialized in taking such frontier tech bets, right? So that way, this satisfied the condition that as a small syndicate, sometimes you can't take bets individually in very deep-pocketed startups or startups which require a lot of capital. You might have to co-invest with other VCs, so because the capital then is assured, and they know they can raise their next round as well. And you need more people to help the founders when you are building something like this, right? So I think all of this came together in the ePlane company. We know the problem is imminent and pertinent, and a solution is required, and the team was a great fit. And another thing is, when you take very early stage bets, teams become critical and very, very important. How resilient the founders are. Are they the right fit for the product or the market which they are working on? So founder market fit also becomes extremely important. And even if you're building something which requires years and years of development, how the founders are able to demonstrate the business acumen, their vision on commercializing this. So I think these become critical factors when you discuss with a founder and make your investment decision. So this is a little bit more on the evaluation process as well, right? And I think coming to the sectors, as Arun said, we are also completely, we like companies building in India, building for the world from India. tech-enabled is something which we prefer. But having said that, we have taken a bet in D2C company as well, because I personally, I understand the space quite well. So when we like a particular company in direct to consumer segment, we don't shy away from taking such bets as well. And going forward, couple of sectors which we are looking for futuristic sectors are clean tech, water management, waste management. I think we would like to look at more companies and innovative companies working on some of these sectors, which are more frontier and futuristic in nature.
Awesome. And I think, Arun, while Bhargavi is talking about frontier bets and outliers, I think you have City Mall, which prima facie, at least for an outsider taking a first look, would seem like a super crowded space, and grocery delivery all over again. So just tell us a little bit more about when you had a first look at City Mall, what are the thoughts that went through your head? And today, of course, City Mall founders on the cover of Forbes and are backed by Accel. But help us understand that very first time that you met them, and how did you evaluate them, considering the space is indeed very crowded, and what were your first thoughts?
So when I first met City Mall, and that was roughly about 2 years ago, right? I mean, honestly, my impression about the founding team was top notch, right? I mean, I really loved the founding team, but that was a pre-seed round, and I didn't invest in them at that time, right? And the reason for that was I didn't particularly fully subscribe to the initial focus that they had. It's very different from what they're doing right now, right? They were doing group buying, which is kind of Pinduoduo model, but more focused on pen drives and basic earphones and stuff like that, products like that they were importing from China. And if people buy that together, they get discounted prices, which is more discounted than if you were to buy alone, right? That was a model they were following at that time, and they were doing almost 700 orders a day. Traction was strong, but I told Angad that I really didn't think that the stickiness for such a product range would be good, right? I mean, I feared that those were fads. People will buy a pen drive today and earphone tomorrow. What I got to do 2 months later, right? And it turned out that was the learning that they had, and they flipped to more day-to-day, daily use case products like groceries. And that's when Angad pinged me back and said, hey, listen, we are doing a proper full-fledged seed round. We're raising $2 million. Would you like to come on board? And then I kind of looked at the model again closely, and I believe that groceries as a space required some disruption. And let me give you a couple of numbers to put some context, right? It's a $500 billion market, groceries in India, right? And we have 600 million internet users, right? Only 100 million actually buy anything online on Amazon or Flipkart or whatever, right? And less than 5% of these e-commerce buyers actually purchase any kind of a grocery product online. So it's a very, very small base of users who are actually buying groceries online, right? And groceries being a very thin margin business, right? I mean, a lot of these e-grocers that have been there for the last few years, they struggle to serve low-income neighborhoods. They struggle to serve the smaller towns. They work very well in high-income neighborhoods in big cities, right? I mean, but the current existing e-grocer model hasn't worked anything beyond the upmarket metro cities, right? So the model of City Mall is basically something that is fundamentally disruptive. What they do is they target low-income neighborhoods, they target small cities, and they appoint community leaders, right? And these community leaders collect orders from their consumers in the neighborhood, aggregate the orders, and place on the platform. So there are two costs that the platform saves. One is the entire marketing cost of acquiring customers is gone. And second, the baskets get aggregated. So you're not delivering 300 rupee baskets to each consumer directly, but you're delivering a 2,000-3,000 rupee basket to the leader who does the last mile delivery, right? So on both counts, it optimizes the entire model. And therefore, I felt it could be a more successful model in markets like India. And that was the leap of faith that I took at the time. There was no evidence that it was working in India, but I trusted the founders that it's a big space. And, like I said, it's a leap of faith and backed, and it turned out to be a phenomenal bet. In the last 10 months, I think they've grown 40-fold. I mean, it's just to put things in context. And And there is tremendous headroom for growth because they're still in 6 small towns like Sonipat and Rewari, and very, very small towns like that, and they're already clocking phenomenal numbers.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think I'm just hearing that you actually are, while you're structured as an angel syndicate, you're actually behaving like a VC, especially when it comes to the value add construct, the time, the patience to persist with the founder through pivots, through tweaks in business models. But just want to take one step back, and would be great if we can just help the audience understand. I'm also seeing a lot of questions in the chat on at what stage angels come in, etc. But before that, just a step back in terms of as founders set out to raise their first external source of capital. Arun, would be just great if you could help them understand, what's the fundamental difference between an angel and an angel syndicate? Yeah.
So an angel syndicate basically is just a group of angels led by a lead investor, someone like me or Bhargavi, right? I mean, so we, from the founder's perspective, basically they're talking to one lead investor, and if they are able to convince the lead investor that it is a good startup to invest in, basically the lead investor then writes out the investment thesis as to why this is a good startup to invest in and why the lead investor herself or himself is putting the money into that startup. And each of the members of that syndicate have the option, but not an obligation, to co-invest in that particular deal. So we pool the money from 20, 30 angels and make one big check of 2 crores or 3 crores. Presently, the average in my syndicate is about 2 crores. But it has grown steadily with every passing quarter. I mean, it looks like it will be 3 crores by the end of this year, right? So from the founder's perspective, they're not having to talk to, if you have to get a 2 crore round done, right? I mean, you have to talk to 20, you have to get 20 angels putting in 10 lakhs, which means you have to talk to 100 of them, right? But here you could get that with one conversation, right? And the second big advantage is that they basically get one check, and it's one shareholder on the cap table. So you're not dealing with 20, 30 people on an ongoing basis as shareholders. So it kind of makes the entire effort from the founder's perspective a lot easier than it is to raise money from angels. But having said that, I mean, I do see a very complementary benefit of actually having an angel syndicate as well as having an early stage fund like WaterBridge, for example. As you know, we work very closely with WaterBridge, and because I see the value add that an angel group brings is very distinct and different and complementary to what a early stage fund like WaterBridge brings, right? I mean, and I've personally found this to be super helpful pretty much in all the deals that we have done as a syndicate. Even if I find in some cases I found the deals first, but I could have done the entire round myself, but I just do half of it and loop in someone like WaterBridge or any other early stage fund to co-invest with us, because like I said, I find the value add of the two different kinds of investors to be a much better equation from the founder's point of view than any one group individually doing it.
Yeah, and I'll just loop Bhargavi in here as well, and for a question in terms of, at like an institutional VC like ours, or for any VC for that matter, LPs are always a closely guarded secret. I would say it's not something that is publicly disclosed, etc. And with an angel syndicate, however, like Arun was rightly saying, you're fundamentally backed by individuals who are taking a bet basis the lead manager. And so are you comfortable kind of revealing who these angels that are part of your syndicate are, especially considering the value add construct and, the color of money is not all the same, I believe. So in terms of you're a sector specific person, a CXO or a tech VP, for example, could be one of your angels and could tremendously value add, like Arun was mentioning, and could literally be like your third or fourth extended founding team, I would say. So do you kind of share who your backers are as part of the syndicate?
Good question, great question. So we at least don't share like a list with the founders, right? But what we do is we know what is the company is about, and we know who are the backers in a particular company. And sometimes some angel, let's say somebody is in fintech and working in one of the big 4 fintech companies, for some reason or conflict of interest decided not to invest in a particular company, but still we think they are part of our LP network and can add value. We make these specific connects. So we do it very actively, and that's part of working with the founders. And I think that is a very significant difference of working with a professional fund manager or a investment manager like me or Arun or a couple of other syndicates, because we work with a startup very similar to how a VC would like to work with, and then take them to the next level, because we are full time, right? And so that is why I think the value add which comes in from a VC and this angel syndicate can become a beautiful combination for a founder. So, for example, if many times startup founders find it difficult to hire product managers early on, because it can be as simple as they don't know what skill to look for, what questions to ask in an interview, or how to evaluate. We have a bunch of product managers who are our backers, and we make connects. Some of them actually take interviews, take the second interview, third interview for the founders to hire. So that is how we try to actively make the connect and add value where we see specific value could be established.
Yep. And just a quick question around timeline and process. So how does this work for a founder? They of course, they reach out to Bargavy, they pitch to Java Capital. And from then on, what's the kind of commitment that you could give of, just say, from first meeting to money in the bank, help them understand what the process is in terms of going back to your angel syndicate to pull the capital?
Sure. So again, first thing is they have to convince us, or we have to be convinced that we want to take a bet in a particular company. And we know our backers, we know the kind of sectors, we know what kind of sectors where we have probably a pre-commitment from some of the backers, right? So once Java decides to roll a term sheet and we say, hey, we are going to invest 250K for X terms, term sheet is rolled, where we are a lead, mostly due diligence happens, and from the term sheet till due diligence generally take at least 30 days minimum, right? So that is the time we also keep to syndicate the capital. And there are companies where we have syndicated money in 8-9 hours as well. Yeah. And there are companies where probably it has taken 20 days, but typically touchwood, God willing, so till date we have been able to wire the money the very next day when all the diligence conditions have been satisfied, the definitives are signed, and the company is ready to receive capital.
Yep. So in many ways, you're actually preparing founders to, as they move forward and work with institutional VCs, whether it's the diligence process or the evaluation process or dealing with the single front fund manager, you in many ways are actually preparing them to get, institutional VCs onboarded. And Arun, you made a very valid point. I just want to reinforce and reiterate that about having a single person on your cap table versus having like 10 little angel investors on your cap table. And I don't know if founders fully appreciate the just besides the administrative hassle, just the fact of having to deal with so many individual folks on a day-to-day basis. Everyone negotiates a separate sets of rights, etc. And then the second part to this is also around typically working with bankers or / investment advisors at an early stage, and they typically take a cut of the fundraise or charge you like a retainer of sorts. So some of the questions also have been around how do angel syndicates get compensated, and what's the industry norm? Would you charge say 2-3% as a syndicate fee, or do you again work very similar to a VC and carry and returns is what you bet on? Yeah.
So yeah, I think contrasting with some of the angel networks that have been there in the market for the last few years, those angel networks have typically brought in a lot of angels, and for the quantum of funds that they raise, they take a percentage of the money as their placement fees. And some of them even additionally take a percentage of advisory shares in the company that they invest in, right? We don't do any of that. From the founder's perspective, our money is just like VC money. There's no placement fee. There is nothing at all. No advisory shares, nothing. We make our money entirely based on performance through carry, which is profit share. So if the investment generates a profit, I take a share of the profit from my investors. So from the founder's perspective, it is just like VC money. There is no extra cost really involved. I think some of the other things that founders should also know about investing or taking money from a syndicate is that this is reduces or practically eliminates the risk of angel tax. Okay, I think this is something that some of the founders are probably aware of, right? If you take money from individuals directly into your cap table, there's a good risk that you might get notices from income tax, asking for an explanation on the amount and the premium that is charged and the share price, and all of that goes away when you invest through a syndicate that is running on a SEBI-approved angel fund.
Yeah. And just the other question in terms of, I'm just looking through the chat as well. If I'm a founder and I've already identified, say, my first angel, typically say friends and family or my ex-boss or a great like CXO in the similar industry, and then I approach a Java or a Waveform, is it possible to kind of combine the two and for my original angel to be a part of your syndicate for this specific deal?
From our perspective, it's not a problem. If the founder wants to bring in some angels that he believes will add value to his or her business, that's totally fine. But the main point is that who's deciding the terms of the deal, right? I mean, like Bhargavi said, I typically see two kinds of deals, right? Early stage deals where someone's looking to raise 2-3 crores, right? If we are the first one to spot that startup, we define the terms of the deal and try to bring in an early stage fund as a co-investor, right? I mean, so that's one kind of a format. In those kind of cases, the founder can bring in angels from their own network, but on the terms that are defined by us, no differential terms between any of the investors. We've also done deals which are on the other extreme, right? I mean, where we are the small investors and there is a large Series A investor defining the terms of the deal, and we have a choice to either participate on those terms or not participate on those terms. But in either case, in general, if the founder wants to bring someone onto the cap table, as long as it's a limited set of people and it's not cluttering the cap table, I think that's totally fine.
Got it. Awesome. And I'll just push the last question to Bhargavi on SAFE and convertibles. And again, a lot of, especially the individual angels or even some accelerators in the country today prefer the YC model, the convertible SAFE kind of a model. And already see a few questions around, what's the industry standard or even what's your preference? And even generally beyond Java, what would you advise a founder, an early stage founder? Yeah.
Sure. I also see a lot of founders now preferring to go for non-priced round. So personally from Java side, while we are open, but I think majority in the industry and with us, we have done CCPS which is compulsorily convertible preference shares. So that is a kind which typically can have a conversion factor which can define your conversion discount or conversion cap in terms of valuation. Those things can be defined in this particular instrument as well. So yeah, that is the short answer, and happy to answer in detail because I don't want this to become a little technical. So happy to answer through PM.
From our perspective, generally speaking, we don't like convertible notes, right? I mean, because a lot of times, basically what the founder is saying, hey, listen, you put your money today and I'll give you a 20% discount over the price that will be determined 6 or 12 months later, right? I mean, so the 20% discount is not commensurate with the very different level of risk that we are putting in the money today, right? So I don't find it to be a commercially an attractive proposition to invest with a discount to a future round. I mean, yes, it's simple from the founder's perspective. If such deals are there, I mean, if that such money is there, one should take it from founder's point of view. But I find that to be not so friendly from the investor's point of view, right? I mean, I generally like the price to be determined today. If you're putting the money today, let's fix the price today. And equity agreements are also better from the point of protecting the rights and of both the parties, and it's kind of cleaner and more articulate than convertible note kind of agreement. So we try to avoid these bridge rounds, discounted convertible notes, and those kinds of funding deals.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree at WaterBridge as well. We prefer price rounds. I think early stage already brings with it a ton of uncertain variables already beyond just the capital, and we feel that it's just fair that we price it. And also, I think, like you said, if you hit your milestones, business is doing well. We don't tend to write our own up rounds, and definitely while we fully encourage follow-on investments, we're not the kind of folks who'll just keep writing and doing our own up rounds. But like Bhargavi said, there are a lot of models out there in the market, and every founder needs to evaluate what's best for them. And what works for them. Of course, speed is essential, but I do think that a lot of investors today, even with price trade equity rounds, are able to turn around term sheets pretty quickly, because at the seed stage, you're fundamentally betting on the founder and the sector, and they're 99% of the time a pre-revenue company, and they're little to no business metrics to really spend time diligencing on. So I think it just keeps everyone's commercial interests and outcomes aligned at the early stage, and I feel it just sets the right precedence. Awesome. I'm just going to jump.
Add a couple of things.
Please.
Sorry to interrupt.
Please.
Because a couple of things which we have been facing. One is it's not always to raise your very first round at a very, very high valuation, because another thing which we are seeing is founders might have put together a quick friends and family kind of round, a quick 1 crore kind of capital, but a very high valuation. So that sets the benchmark. And then when you are looking for institutional capital, you want something above that, and maybe your business growth or milestones are not commensurate with your current expected capital. And many times we are seeing very interesting, promising companies, but the valuation which is set in a friends and family kind of round becoming sort of a major discussion point before you can make your decision. So I think that's another thing which founders have to be cognizant of before actually closing your funding round. While money is important, but at what price also becomes important.
No, great. I think, Bhargavi, I'll keep the next question with you, and we'll just keep alternating between Arun and Bhargavi, because we have over like 50 questions, and we have like 20 minutes. So I'm going to try and squeeze in as many as possible. I think the first one is very relevant considering the pandemic and the second wave, as to how do you run a remote process, and how do you decide over a Zoom call whether you want to back a founder or not, and just help founders understand what's the new normal in the VC Zoom world today.
Yeah, so I say that we are completely virtually operated fund, because we started when the lockdown
in
was
the middle of the
started.
lockdown.
Yeah, so I think some of us we haven't met some of our portfolio company founders till date. So one thing is, we typically ask founders to keep their video on, and at least one of us keep our video on in every conversation which we have with the founders. And maybe when we are convinced or we need more information, I think earlier, maybe in one call, you used to make decision, or in one meeting. We typically try to follow it up with another meeting or another call through Zoom, just to be sure that we are doing some check boxes right, and we are gathering more information. And I think offline of the Zoom meeting as well, we try to do our diligence on the team, because as I said, team becomes a very, very critical factor when you take a bet very, very early on. So we try to do as much diligence, or get as much information about the team as we can from our network, from their network, just to corroborate some of the points or some of the notes which we have made during the conversation.
Got it. And Arun, I'm just going to ask you a question around sectors that many founders are pinging and sharing links of their startups. But very quickly, since both of you are sector agnostic, can you give us a sneak peek into where most of the startups are lying today, and specifically, spaces like hardware, IoT? Do you have a view on these spaces, and do you think there are any positive or negative biases by VCs into certain of these sectors?
I think the focus from a sector perspective is to a degree, determined by our own backgrounds and where we feel more comfortable and where we feel we have some knowledge to be able to evaluate the startups that are happening, right? I mean, so from our negative list, right? I mean, the sectors that we haven't done or we are unlikely to do. One is direct to consumer. I mean, I've worked in an FMCG company, but that's very different than evaluating or picking the best healthy snacks out of 20 different startups that are doing healthy snacks today, right? I mean, I don't know what makes them successful. I don't have a way to determine, and therefore I don't do D2C brands. Second is, like you rightly pointed out, hardware, anything that involves manufacturing, IoT devices. Some of these kinds of startups also we don't do. So, and the third one is kind of a conditional one, which is deep tech. And here, when I say deep tech, kind of a tech where, like, I mean, where you're doing AI for clinical trials in pharmaceutical industry, for example, right? I mean, requires a lot of domain expertise to really be able to evaluate startups of that nature, right? I mean, so if we don't understand that deep tech, then we let it pass and refer the founders to other good investors who know that space better. But other than that, all of the segments, we are generally open as long as it resonates. But what are some of the sectors that we are more upbeat or more keenly looking at? I mean, one is I'm looking at more insurance tech startups. I mean, I think it's poised for a nice disruption. I'm looking at alternative commerce models or any e-commerce ancillary related spaces, B2B, B2C, social commerce, video commerce, all kinds of new kinds of commerce models is something that is very interesting. We've done two of them, both have done spectacularly well, and so that's interesting. The third is early stage SaaS products that are built for the globe, where founders come from a SaaS background, where they have actually worked in a product or a tech kind of a role in SaaS kind of startups. I think that's also something that is very interesting. So we have a positive list, we have a negative list. Anything in between, we are open, we explore and take it on a case-by-case basis.
I think you made a very valuable point there on just investing in sectors that you're familiar with or where you believe you can add the most value beyond just the capital. I think many founders, apply or write in to funds without first checking the existing portfolio to first check if there's a direct or even indirect portfolio conflict, only to be declined later to say that this conflict. So I would really encourage founders to first look up the website of, say, a Waveform, a Java, before pitching, to make sure that they know directly conflicting bets. And if they are, then to have a very, very compelling reason as to why a second or a third bet needs to be taken in the space. Many, at least VCs, wouldn't take directly competing bets in their portfolio. And I guess the second thing is to look up the background of the partners in the firm and the kind of deals that they've previously done or that exist in the portfolio, to just get a flavor of what preferences are. While of course there will always be a E-Plane company, which is an outlier, or we have Nimble in our portfolio that's like a cooking robo, but these are still outliers end of the day. And I think to answer, and I can see many questions around what sector does Java invest in, or what sector does Waterbridge invest in. I would say the best way, there are no straight answers to that, and the best way to do it is to head to our websites, to look at our portfolios, to look at our team profiles, LinkedIn profiles, and to get a sense of what our strengths are. And if you really believe that we can be, as I always say with early stage investing, be extended founding teams and partners, and if there's a value add construct beyond just the capital. So yeah. I think, Bhargavi, it's a tough question, but a controversial one off late on solo founders versus group founders. Again, the VC industry is always seems to have a negative bias towards solo founders. So what's your view on single versus multiple founding teams here?
Great. So I want to take an example from one of my personal portfolio, but I don't want to name the company. It's actually have grown big now. It's a SaaS company, and when we first evaluated single founder, so all the alerts went up with a single founder. But one thing which we followed was is there a complementary team which the founder has built? So this founder was able to put together a complementary team very, very early on, which means one, he was able to attract talent. Second, he was able to convince people to join early on with not so significant equity. And they so we spoke to some of them and they were equally passionate. I think these are some of the surrogates which we look for. And I think that is something which we try to follow even at Java Capital. But I would say never. But I have been entrepreneur myself, so I know it is a very difficult journey. Sometimes you have to wear multiple hats, and you need sometimes a emotional support in your journey. So in those situations, having a co-founder always helps. That is why we as investors also look for founders who complement each other quite well. So we prefer a not single founder company, but I would say never. Like we will probably resort to other evaluation metrics if all other checkboxes are a good thing.
Yeah,
I
think
agree
it's
with
always
what Bhargavi said. I think it's it's not any, I mean, it's not a hard criterion, but it's very hard to build alone, right? I mean, it's great to have a 2-3 member team. Equally, I've also seen founding teams with 5-6 people, which I think is a different kind of a problem, right? It's good to have a 2-3 member team. I mean, it's a large enough team to share the load and build in the early stages. And it's also not a chaotic large group, right?
Yep, I think the other question that gets asked is, if you're building a tech company, do you necessarily need to have a tech guy or a CTO in the founding team? And could it potentially be like 2 business guys setting out to build a tech company? And I guess it's very, very similar to what Arun and Bhargavi said. And it'll be great to have a CTO as part of the founding team. But even if you have a very a senior hire or an extended founding team or early employee who's worked with you before or who's like a very strong tech person, that could work as well. So no straight answer, but yes, if you're building a product company, would be good to see a tech person in the core founding team or early employee, at least, for sure. Yeah. I think the other question we're getting asked a lot is how early is early for a seed company, and how do you really define when you're ready to hit up an early stage VC, and what are the metrics? So you may not be revenue earning, but do you need to be post MVP? Do you need to have early paying customers? So maybe Arun, you could specifically answer this question for B2B companies, and then Bhargavi can take it up for B2C in terms of what are early indicators for success and when do you believe they're ready for their first external round?
Yeah, we've invested in pre-launch, pre-product idea stage companies, and in fact, in one of them, we committed to investing even before the company was incorporated and the founders hadn't left their jobs, right? I mean, so it can be as early as it can be, right? I mean, but the point is when it is so early, the bet is almost entirely on the founding team, right? I mean, there's really nothing else to lean on. There's no data, there's no product that you can see or feel, right? And therefore, a lot of the pitch that depends on how articulate the founders are, how nuanced their understanding of the space that they are looking to play in. And if that part of it goes well, I mean, founders can get funded even at a pre-seed stage. Today, it's not just angels. Honestly, even a lot of VCs, early stage VCs and Series A VCs are also actually jumping in and investing at a pre-launch, pre-seed stage. So it's never too early, right, for anyone. But having said that, it doesn't mean that everyone who is at that pre-launch stage will necessarily get funded. In many cases, people will say, go build the product first, because while I get your story, I mean, I want to see a proof point. I mean, so it varies. But I think all of us have done investments that have ranged from pre-product all the way till Series A, right?
Yep. Any early indicators for a B2B company, I don't know, in terms of, do you need like a paying customer, a pilots, like top 3 metrics maybe? Yeah.
So listen, in general, I mean, rather than metrics, I will say what broadly we look for, right? I mean, whether it's B2C or B2B, it's the same principle. What we are not looking for is big numbers or traction that is blowing everyone's minds, right? I mean, because very often it's not about the quantity of numbers. If you take a B2C business, whether you have 50,000 users or you have 10,000 users, it's not going to, the story is not going to be that different. The question is there among those 10,000 users, are you able to prove that you've got a business and there is a model that's working? Is there a reason why those people are coming back to you again? Is there any signs of engagement? Because the growth problem can be solved with venture money, right? I mean, if I say that, hey, I've got a model that's working, I've got 10 customers or 10,000 consumers, VCs will give you money to take that 10,000 to 100,000 or 10 million, right? I mean, so what you need to prove is that within that small base of audience or customers you're working with, can you prove that you've got a business and there's a model that is actually working very well?
Yep. No, well said. And Bhargavi, anything to add? I think one thing that founders always say is that on forums is that VCs give a cryptic one-line response saying, we'd love to keep in touch and come back when there's more traction. And I guess, how do you define more traction?
Yeah, I think that's where Arun's point is very important, right? So when people ask me, at least when they say what number is a good number, I say it's not about the number. It's about are you able to demonstrate that you have identified a problem or a white space in a crowded market and consumers are coming and engaging for you? And are you able to prove it in probably a microgeography or a very, very focused customer demography, right? So then, have you been able to do it organically? Is a little bit of flywheel set in motion without spending a lot of money to acquire these users. So I think these are some of the factors which we also say very important. And B2C, it becomes extremely important for investors also to do a lot of homework because sometimes it's a combination of founders plus market bet when it comes to B2C companies, right? So you need to see, because today many sectors seem very crowded when you just look at it from a 20,000 feet level, but you might have to dive deeper to see, are there still white spaces, and whatever this company is working on, can it actually make it big in this micro space which it has identified? So that way it becomes a market plus founder combination of evaluation criterion.
Yep, I think we're also getting questions on, follow-on funding from angel syndicates. And do you typically restrict yourself to a single check at the beginning, or are you comfortable with doing follow-on? So Arun, I'll love you to take that. Yeah.
So I mean, we'd love to follow on, right? I mean, and right now, I mean, as we speak, there is one of our portfolio companies is raising a Series B, and we are participating in Series B as well, right? A lot of angels understand that the risk profile of the startup changes quite significantly as it moves from seed to Series A to Series B. The downside risk becomes lesser. Of course, the upside is not the same multiple as you would expect at seed. So a lot of angels like to participate even in Series A and Series B deals. But the challenge is not so much about whether we want to participate or not. I mean, usually what happens in Series A and Series B deals is the rounds get very crowded, right? I mean, and you've got one big VC coming.
Everybody is fighting for allocation.
And honestly, it's a tough struggle for founders to figure out a way to accommodate everybody into the next round, right? I find usually that to be the challenge rather than whether as an angel group we want to put in the money or not. Typically, we make sure we have a right. We like to exercise it as much as we can. And sometimes we can't, but that's part of the game.
Yeah. I think there's a founder here who's asked if he can pitch to you, Arun. So I've put up the Waveform link, and I would encourage him to just reach out to Arun directly and just write him a mail. And the question really was his idea stage. I think we took that question up earlier, and Arun does have a history of investing in idea stage companies. So yes is the answer to that. Yeah. How do you evaluate founding team? I think this is coming back again and again. And I guess the question really, if I have to consolidate some of those questions, is do we put founders ahead of markets? Or if the market is like a large opportunity, is it like markets first or founders first?
So from my perspective, I think it's both are equally important. And my own history tells me, for example, I could have done City Mall in the pre-seed round, right? But the reason I didn't do at the time, I thought the business model or the space he was targeting wasn't really a good space. But then, as all good founders do, he pivoted. And when he pivoted, I entered. I mean, obviously at a higher price and a higher valuation, etc. Right? But I could have been a part of the journey right from the very, very beginning, right? So in general, you have to evaluate the model and the space and the market that you're playing in, because there are some spaces today that are so cluttered that the competitive risk is just too high, even if it is a good founder, right? But having said that, if the founding team is outstanding, right, even in a good competitive space, they can still go figure some way to build something unique in that particular space. So ultimately, I think founding team trumps, when there is a trade-off to be made between these two factors. But when we look at deals, ideally, we want to see a good founding team in a good market, right? I mean, that is obviously the ideal case scenario, but often it doesn't happen. But if you really love the founding team and their capability in your judgment, you go with it.
Bhargavi, do you have a view from Java? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for us as well, team becomes extremely critical because you may be operating in a very, very large market, but if you haven't figured out certain nuances and operational aspects, then you may probably not grow. And another aspect is sometimes the market might be very nascent now, or the market might not exist now as well, right? Or it might be a latent need. So that's where your futuristic bet starts coming, and your view on how things are going to pan out 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, going to come into play. And again, it will come back to whether this team has it in them to put in such a long show, to are resilient enough to go through the journey for the next 8-9 years, and be there when the market is ripe and it's booming. So I think sometimes it comes down to the founding team. And as Arun said, the deadly combination is large market, especially the market which is on a high tide, and a great team. But not always you get to take bets on such a combination.
Yeah. I think there's a fantastic question here, and I would love to ask, extended questions on that. It's actually about exits for angels, and would love for any of you to take this up. We always have spoken. We've only, in fact, spoken about when to get in an angel. But good question around how do you enable exits for angels, and when's the right time, price, and just would love for both of you, in fact, to answer this. Yeah.
From our perspective, I mean, what I tell all the angels in my syndicate is this is not a short game, right? I mean, you don't invest today thinking that, hey, next year you'll walk away with 5 times or 10 times. You'll never make money that way, right? I mean, so typically, if you invest in 30 companies, you make probably most of the returns of the portfolio from 4 or 5 of those companies, okay? Each of those 4 or 5 giving you 30x, 40x, 50x, or even 100x or more, right? If you exit early, basically the entire upside of those few that could have driven your portfolio return is destroyed, right? And so as a principle, you have to start with the assumption that you got to play for the long, you got to play for 5-7 years, and not entering in to put in money today and take it out tomorrow. If people do that systemically, then I'm 100% sure it is very hard to actually make money that way. So now here is the irony, right? I mean, what usually happens is the best performing, those 5 in the 30 companies in your portfolio, everyone wants to buy you out, right? Everyone wants you to sell, get out of that company, but you just don't want to sell. So, but on the other hand, there may be 15 companies in your portfolio 2 years into the journey. You may want to actually liquidate some or all of that equity, but there will be no takers for it, right? So effectively, at a portfolio level, you end up holding the shares for 5-7 years, right? So exits, I think, are there today, especially I think very different today than it was 5 years ago, especially given the amount of up rounds that are happening, exits through bigger, newer investors into the startup, I think is a very, very viable path. So it is not, my worry is not about getting an access or an opportunity to exit. My worry is how do I stay put in that company if it is winning, and how do I stay put in that company for the long, right?
I just wanted to add here, I think that is where professional managers like us probably would play some role, because through syndicates, one of the active role which we play is timing the exit as well. And that's where some of our experience will come into place, and probably we have more information as well on the industry, on the company, on its competitors, funding scenario, so many other factors. So that's where angels could probably get more insight, and that is one of the jobs of a syndicate, right, on timing the exit well. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I had on. This is some of the administrative hassles that kind of compound on you as you grow the company, and especially if you grow it well, that you'll have to deal with 20 small angels that you have to give an exit for versus dealing with a syndicate and a single, fund manager. The next questions are mostly around founder due diligences, referral checks. So not sure who wants to take this one, Bhargavi. Maybe you can go with this. And do you kind of commission formal diligence reports on the company, on the founders, and what do you really mean by a founder referral check here?
Sure. So, as I said, when we lead around in a particular company, then we do legal diligence at least. Financial diligence might or might not happen, but we have law firms which are experienced in legal diligence. But these are not diligences which will go on for months, right? Considering the stage and the company's age, these are what we call as limited diligence, right, which tends to get done in 20 days, 25 days at the max. And apart from that, in terms of founders check, as I said, wherever it's possible, so probably if somebody is a second time founder, then we try to reach out to previous co-founders, previous investors, and of course the founders mostly will know that we are reaching out to these people and talking. And and co-workers sometimes, people in the industry, if the founder has been in the startup sector for some time. So wherever, how much ever it's possible, we try to do that, especially because of the stage we enter, and it's largely a founder's bet. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. And just Ty is giving me a time check. It's 5 o'clock, so would encourage all of you to quickly put in the last few questions that you want, since we'll be just closing the chat and the Q&A section. So just furiously punch in the last few questions that you have. Otherwise, I've put both Arun and Bhargavi's links on the chat box, and you can reach out to them privately later on. So we will continue taking questions for the next 2-3 minutes, and all three of us will continue to be on the webinar, but we also want to respect everyone's time here. So just quickly, let's get in the last few questions. All right. I think we covered the due diligence part. I think one of the other good questions here is that what are the min and max ticket sizes? And would you, when you say outlier bets, is it a possibility that you could also take an outlier bet, say in a small allocation in a Series A, for example, and are you therefore willing to compromise on valuation? Yeah.
Yeah, I think even Arun mentioned, so we are open to leading around or co-investing with other investors. I think a case in point is Fast Forward program, right? I think we would be co-investing with Waterbridge or a couple of other partners as well in a particular company. So, and sometimes if we really like a company, we do participate in Series A rounds. I think we have already done it with at least one company which I can think of. So open for all that. So beyond Series A, I think it becomes little riskier, because as Arun said, for angels, the multiple of exit or the multiple of growth of capital becomes significantly diminished beyond that level, while the risk has also reduced. So it's a trade-off. So these are really case-on-case decisions which we make. Yeah.
Great. Any stage preferences? I don't know, more or less in the same lines of Bhargavi.
No, I think very similar.
Yeah.
Pre-seed, pre-launch till Series A, and hopefully even do one pro rata participation in Series B as well. So that's about how far we go.
Would it
And
be
check
possible to
sizes,
give a broad
yeah,
check size? Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
check
My question
sizes. I
was
mean,
that.
see, when we started as a syndicate, I mean, our first deal was $100,000, right? But very quickly grew. Now I don't take allocations less than $250,000 now, right? I mean, that's the minimum that we need if we offer the deal to the syndicate. But we've done as high as $450,000 in one of the deals, and but our sweet spot is about 300K right now, right? But a little bit here or there, it doesn't matter. But if it is too small, like someone comes and says, "Hey, listen, I've got this 50K allocation in this deal. Would you be interested?" Honestly, we are not. It's too small for us, because part of the challenge is that you've got to be able to put in a meaningful amount of money from your point of view, right? I mean, for it to warrant the kind of time and attention and effort that you want to put in, right? If you put in too little, it's a kind of a gamble. You put that money and you hope that it returns something, but you're not really doing anything to make it work. Whereas when we put in what is our sweet spot, 300K at an early stage, even if you have 3, 5, 10%, anywhere in between that, then there is a strong incentive for us to work closely with the founders, support them in every way that we can, and help them actually succeed, right? So in fact, I tell the founders, I was talking to one of the founders in the Fast Forward program itself yesterday, and he was kind of putting a round together where with 4 or 5 different investors putting in 50K, 100K each. I told him, don't do that. I mean, it's really important for you to have, if you're raising $1 million, have one investor putting in $500,000, maybe 1 or 2 putting in the balance 500, right? It's important to have each of the investors in the round having enough skin in the game. Otherwise, they'll just put that money and forget about it.
Got it. And last question as we wrap up, and it's a good, very open-ended, high-level question on the future of VC. What excites you the most about early stage VC ecosystem in India today, and what do you think have been the broad changes? Arun, I'll start with you, since you've been part of this ecosystem the longest. What excites you more, and what inflection points are you looking forward to?
I think honestly, right now, if you talk to any investor in the market, they will tell you that it is incredibly exciting times, right? Where we are at right now. But it's also something that we've got to be watching carefully, cautiously, because one of the things that, like I keep telling everyone, is that this is a very long and patient game, building value through venture investing, right? It's not something that you can ride as a wave or a tide and try to make some quick money. You've got to build a portfolio patiently and over a period of time, right? What's exciting? I mean, honestly, today, the quality of founding teams has increased dramatically, right? I mean, I think in the last 5 years, I mean, because now there are many startups that have become big, successful. Many of the people who are working there have branched out, started their own startups. So there's a second generation of founders that's coming from the first generation founding companies, right? I mean, so the quality of founding teams has gone up dramatically. Two, very glad for the founders. There is capital has become quite a commodity. I mean, honestly, I'm very surprised if any good founding team today can't raise $500,000 or $1 million of capital in the market, right? So I think all of this is great, but I think that this is only going to get better. I mean, right now, I would think probably like Bhargavi, me, we are, I don't know, 20 people who are leading syndicates like that. In 3 years, we'll have 200 people leading syndicates like this, right? So the sources of capital will continue to increase. The quality of teams will continue to increase, which makes the ecosystem super competitive. And therefore, like in all spaces, right? I mean, the best will really succeed, very well. So it's a long game. I think that's all I can say, and it's super exciting times. Probably the beginning of a very long, exciting journey.
Yeah, and Bhargavi, it seems to be a season of unicorns. I think I'm beginning to lose count. It's one a day almost, and 11, 13 already this year. So do you think we're staring at a funding winter?
I don't think immediately, because Tiger is also roaring recently. So I think it's actually very exciting time, and it's also, I think, going to become a cautious time both for investors. When I say investors, especially angel investors, and for founders. Founders is, as Arun said, capital is becoming a commodity. So it's extremely important from whom you're raising capital, whom are you partnering with now. And for angel investors, if you are taking the bets individually, then fine. If you're going through platforms or syndicates, it becomes extremely important. Whom are you riding with, right? Who are the lead syndicates? Always look for the credentials of people who are leading a particular investment, because it becomes very important, especially when you're building a portfolio out. Yeah, but otherwise, I think I don't see a winter now. I think this is going, because more fund announcements are coming in, more new funds are getting set up, more larger funds are coming in, where the fund ones have been tinier ones. So I think it's a very exciting time to be in.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will end this on a quote from Buffett that people are sharing in the chat, which is, when everyone's greedy, be fearful. And when everyone is fearful, be greedy. And on that note, thank you so much, Bhargavi. Thank you so much, Arun, for giving us your time middle of the week. It was a great session. We had over 100 participants, very engaging, a lot of questions coming in. Thank you for helping the founding community. And we have pasted the links of both Java and Waveform, and please feel free to reach out to them directly. Thanks to TiE Bangalore as well for setting this up for us. We will be hosting investor showcases every Wednesday, same time, 4, and look forward to seeing you all soon again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Anjali, for patiently moderating this. Thanks a lot. Nice meeting you, Arun, and bye, TiE folks.
Same here, Bhargavi. Yeah. Thanks, Bhargavi. Thanks, Anjali.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.